Morning, chaps. Thank you
Good
very
morning.
much again for joining us for our third week of our paint forum. And today we are talking about translucence. Please tell me I'm correct.
We certainly are. Certainly that's the plan.
Right, so let's just kick it straight off. So, Craig, can you explain the main considerations when creating translucent colours?
So yeah, it's always because it's only 5% of a standard joinery company's procedure, if that the skill of creating translucent is kind of lost and forgotten throughout the year. Even when they've been successful, they don't do it again for another couple of months or even longer. So we always have to consider where the original stain sample is coming from, what we're trying to match, and then what timber type was the original, and what timber type are we going to create a match to on the new windows. So we have to bear all these factors in mind, because it's pointless somebody saying they want windows, they've had Sapele windows, they've had a stain, whatever coloured stain, and asking you to match using Grandis windows with the same colour stain, because you're not going to get the same colour match at the end. So we have to have a sample to work from, or it's always best for a joinery manufacturer to have a sample to work from, and then create a sample using their own process to match the sample that they're trying to create.
Sure, and I think you've hit the nail on the head in regards of, it is only a small percentage of what joiners are doing. So whilst the opaque colours and the winter painting was big topics, and this is in respect a quite a small topic, probably one of the most important, because they're sort of not getting the same level of experience with this.
Yes.
So I'm assuming it goes wrong more often.
Yes.
So, yes, I hope you're all listening. So, Steve, talk us through the correct process to achieve colour consistency when we're talking translucence.
Greg pretty much answered all the questions, really. But this we're getting into the detail now.
Is there anything to do with the sun and the moon?
Not on this occasion, but who knows? So the first thing to remember in this conversation is we're talking about high build translucent systems in the joinery, window and door industry. That's what they generally are. And in translucence, you're putting a similar amount of top coat in film build on, but because you can see the base material, that has a large impact on the influence, the way the eye sees it, and therefore the colour. And just as an example of where this might start, Grandis. That is a typical example of the range of colour that we see within that timber species. So when somebody comes to you and says they want a light oak colour, then of course this is the type of substrate material range that the joinery manufacturer can be putting into the joinery, and therefore the translucent colour, and we'll get on to detail of pigment level and colour influence, but that is the first starting position. So it's always good to have that in mind. It's always good to explain to the client that that's the range of colour that they're choosing, and the limitations it has on colour accuracy, or the variation that it has on colour accuracy. So that is one of the main influencers, to have an open conversation, to show examples of the colour within the range of timber and how that can blend across the joinery item or the building or the windows joinery in the building itself.
So again, a big emphasis on managing the customer expectation up front rather than once the job is done.
Yes.
Yeah. So surface preparation, Craig. Obviously, we've talked about this off of the forum with Jed at Lights, but surface preparation, how can that affect the outcome of the translucent shade?
Again, so the surface preparation, depending on what we do, will impact the uptake on the base stain. So if we on the same piece of timber, if we abrade that timber with an 80 grit sandpaper and apply a base stain to it, you're going to get a far higher uptake of that base stain color than what you would if you prepared the timber with a 240 grit paper. So again, it's very important to understand where the sample is that you're creating. So if, for example, if you're creating a window sample, that matches a color from Remus or it matches a color from Technos, is understand what that timber's been prepared with to get the correct color outcome. So the grit of the paper that we're actually using it's very important because the more absorbent the timber is, the more pigments of that base stain are going to absorb into the timber and create a darker color.
If I can just give an example of that, I've got two pieces of Accoya. It's not going to show it up on the screen, is it? But that one is fine sawn and that one is planed. So you can see straight away that the open structure of the surface has an influence on, as you say, the absorbency of the base stain, as Craig said. Sanding can do that as well. So again, if we go back onto the best surface for a coated finish is a very good high quality machine surface, then that is always the preference to be looked at. And I know that we're talking to Jed about doing another presentation on that very subject. So, but that's the impact of surface preparation.
Sure. And I guess if you're matching your own product and you know what you've done and you know what the standard sort of grit that you use in your factory, whatever, it's probably reasonably easy. However, how the hell do you manage that if you're trying to match someone else's windows from 2 years ago, for example? How do you go about that? How would you ever know?
Yeah, so the best way is to take actual samples to match up against an existing window.
Yeah.
And then if you've got a close match, then you would just get the detail on how that sample was prepared. Because it's pointless you sanding a piece of timber with an 80 grit and lightly brushing on a base stain, whereas the sample may have prepared with 240 grit paper and saturated coated. So it either dipped in a base stain or sprayed to saturation point. So it's very important to, get the understand the process of how the sample has been prepared.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right. The best samples are the ones prepared by the customer because they've created that color outcome, not the manufacturer or the manufacturers will create a good starting point, but always the best samples are created by the actual manufacturer.
Sure. Okay.
And again, as we go back to the opaque conversation, they should be supplied in this case on a piece of timber because that's the substrate, even on several pieces of timber that might be in the range of color of that species, just to show the client the influence of the color, because they've sent you a small piece of applied timber, probably with a brush product, said, can you match that color? And so we're dealing with the depth of build, the sheen level, and the way the sample looks. But Craig just sort of touched on this subject of, again, red grandis, different species, but different application methods on. So these are the dipped product, that is exactly the same product but ragged off. So you can achieve different starting colours by your methodology, which influences the end colour, particularly on light top coat translucents. So they're all things that we have to take into consideration, and getting buy-in, sign off from the client is important on translucent colours, particularly if they're customised.
Absolutely. So, Steve, talk to us about the wet film thickness application and the effect on the final colour.
This is where Craig wanted his picture, because the picture that Craig has is a great sort of, it shows quite clearly the effect of the different levels of application on translucence. So taking a step back from this, a white paint is a white paint. You're looking for opacity and coverage. On a translucent, you have a certain level of pigment. The higher the pigment level, the more sun protection within reason. So the light oak colours have got the lowest levels of UV protection in them, but they show off the characteristics of the substrate underneath, and people like them. So that being the case, depending on your substrate and depending on your base stain colour, they all come together to make the final approved colour. So the pigment level has an influence both on surface protection, but the colour that you achieve depending on how much of that product that you put on. And it's the darker colours that are, or the mid translucents and the darker ones, that are the more difficult in technique, because if I put double the amount of paint on, I get double the colour. So if you get crossover on your corners, or your beads are done separately, they can come together in the final assembly and look a different colour. And if you can find that picture, it would be really helpful. But
I can't find it. I've just been looking. Have you got it there?
Let me just see if I can.
Because if you have, you can share your screen.
So if anybody has been involved in the spraying while Craig's looking for that, then the technique of application is manually is robotic. So you're starting to put an equal amount on the inside mold rebate, on the outside stormproof, and then on the faces. And as you say, if you have a crossover method on the corners, you will double up the layer, and therefore double the color on translucents. On opaque, you would double the volume of paint, and then you increase and extend the drying times. So equal application is important, not only for aesthetic appearance, but also performance of the coating on the joinery.
Excellent. Have you found it, Craig?
2 seconds. I think I have, yes.
Well, let's move on to the next question while Craig's looking for that, just to help him. And
I think we've sort of covered pigment levels, but how the pigment levels affect the performance of translucent coatings? Have you sort of?
pretty much. So we're talking about the color palette, the pigment level. So if we look at it very much in sun factor creams, so if I'm putting sun factor 15 on, I know as a person I'm not getting the protection that I would with a sun factor 50. Although that looks very white and makes me look very bad in my on my lounger. But that being the case, it's all about sun protection, UV protection. So the choice of pigment level on translucents directly impacts the performance level, longevity of the coating. So in the industry, we give scope of performance depending on the level of shade, translucency, pigment level that is in the paint.
Okay. And
I found the picture. The picture, Luke. Do I go on to?
At the very bottom, you've got a share button.
Oh, yeah.
and then you just click the screen that you want to share, and voila, it should appear. Fingers crossed.
How's that?
Look at that! Look at that! Well done.
So yeah, this.
I'll explain, Craig.
So this obviously it's the same base stain, and it's the same translucent top coat that this customer's applied to the window. But what you can see here is the inexperience, shall we say, of both the application and the understanding of how the base stain should be applied. Because what you can first see is the big difference in color between the frame and the sash. So we can see there, we don't know when it gets to this stage, it's too late. So we've got to understand that we need to keep a process on each stage of application. So what we should have is a sample of what the timber color should look like at base stain stage, and then a sample of the timber color, what it should look like at mid coat stage. And only then we've got a good idea that we're going to end up with the correct color. But you can see here that the beads are a different color to the sash, and the sash is a different color to the frame. But you can also see a good indication that over application has been done here by the corner colors of the sash window. So when somebody's applying a spray coating of paint and they just go on in horizontals and verticals, they overlap the corners. And on opaques, although you're getting a bit too high a film thickness, you're not going to see any color difference. But on translucents, the application, there's a skill involved to be able to create that color consistency all around the sash. And that's in one movement, or feathering in and feathering out to the corners. You can see here quite clearly on the sash window that the corners have probably gone overlapped twice on each coating, and that's why you've got the dark corners. So it's very important to keep an even film thickness all over the window.
The other technique is generally on base stains as well, as Craig alluded to, and if you've got a spray application process, but the sample that was created by the coating company is dipped and allowed to run off, then you can achieve two different colors, but you can achieve the same color as well. So as Craig said, if you've got a control sample for the sprayer that has been produced by the same application method as the coating company or whoever produced the color sample, and the sprayer uses that to control that color after application, you're starting in the right place. The crossover on the corner, particularly the bottom left one on the sash, is a technique. And so again, as Craig said, if you only spray translucents every 3 months, then this tests your application technique. But that's why, as coating companies, service suppliers, we're there to support and help overcome those things.
I was going to say, so this is a very good example of how not to do it. And if your windows look anything like that, call you guys in.
Yeah, basically, yes.
It's these sort of things get in the awkward conversations with a customer when it's far too late.
Yeah, absolutely. So with translucents, once they're in situ like this, obviously that's gone in like that. But how does UV and weather affect translucents in as opposed to opaque colors? What's the difference?
So,
okay, shall I start, Craig, and then
go on, then you
sort of join in. So the influence of the sunlight has an impact on the substrate. Is there a thought that the coating fully protects the substrate? There might be, but in going back to my sun factor cream protection, if I've got a very low sun factor cream protection, then I'm not protecting the substrate as much as an opaque white system. So I have to be mindful of that. The lighter the translucent, generally the lower the UV protection. And so what can happen is we get a change of substrate color. So that is the protected side with just cardboard in my conservatory window, and that is the unprotected face. So you can start to see the influence of UV on the substrate. That happens under the coating. And it would also happen in the rebate of the door. So where the door style is exposed, and the part in the weather seal is not, those are the color changes that I can start to see. Different timbers operate in different methods. That's a piece of Accoya that is not changing very much at all, but that is a piece of modified heat treated wood. That is the exposed face, that is the unexposed face. So these are influences on the color. They're not happening under opaques because the light can't get to the surface of the substrate, but on translucents, it's another conversation with the customer when you're going down the route of substrate choice. What influences that have on the translucency of the coating?
Yeah. So again, massively important to manage
Massively
the customer
important.
expectation.
Yeah.
Prior.
That's a thermally modified heat treated hardwood. And where's the one that I like the best? That is again another thermally heat treated hardwood. So this is, I just put cardboard over, and that's the difference that you can show the customer. This happens with all substrates: sapele, iroko, adigbo, oak, pine. They're all happening. I like this one because I think you can see just there's the hole punch, and I've just put masking tape over it. So where the light can pass through the masking tape, it still has an effect on UV change. I find these things interesting. I apologize.
He loves a sample, does Steve?
I do. I love a sample.
He's got all weekend to go on this. Just following on from Steve's, analogy of the sun cream. So if we look at the lighter the translucent coating color, that's the lower sun factor. The darker the color, the higher the sun factor protection we've got. So, and then that's also affects the maintenance cycles. So a lighter translucent color will require higher maintenance cycles than a darker translucent color. That
was going to be a question. I think Owen's put in the chat, what should be the customer's expectation of the new coating before recoating? In my experience, translucence needs a new coating within 2 years, but the customers expect this to last longer. Oak is always a problem for this type of finish. I know elevation and location have an effect as well as UV. So yeah, again, another conversation that needs to be had prior to going down this route is the maintenance, I'm sure. And what would you say, as is Owen right, within 2 years, or what would you say as a standard?
For me, it's generally directly related to substrate. So if we take the different substrates, like the more unstable, which is oak, the UV protection has a direct relationship between timber stability. And so it's not the coating that is underperforming, it's the amount of light that is getting to the substrate, which is impacting on the surface, as well as wetting and drying. So if it's unstable, it's moving a lot, and then the sunlight is bombarding the surface and breaking down the natural glues, the lignins in the timber. If you've got a more stable timber, like Accoya, as we know it to be, then the coatings last a long time, and it's been shown that translucents can last over 10 years on Accoya, whereas standard substrates are probably 3 to 5, depending on the level of translucency. So substrate choice, stability, has a major impact on coating performance and therefore the maintenance cycles.
Sure.
Would you agree, Craig?
So yeah, just the most important question that probably everybody gets answered, who does deal with oak, is clear finish. And we would always steer away from putting a clear finish of any sort on oak.
Technos one as well.
Excellent. So the obviously that's a pretty big takeaway, but also it, you know, I think we've reiterated enough times through these sessions is the biggest thing for me as a non-joiner and sprayer is the business owner or whoever's selling this job, or regardless of what finish is going on it, it's all about managing the customer's expectation up front and showing your expertise and your knowledge to the customer before a window is made, as opposed to trying to recover with your knowledge and expertise after the horse has bolted, so to speak.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely good. And what Craig just said about clear, that doesn't mean that there isn't a natural tone in tinned pigment levels that can be produced for that timber species. So again, we deal with those on that basis. So again, setting the expectations, showing the client what they can have, what performs and why it performs, and therefore it's education. And generally you don't fail on that basis. They either change their mind because you've educated them, or they go with your recommendation because it's tried and tested.
Excellent. Right, chaps, let's get back to the floor for any more questions, and no doubt a horror story or two with translucence. Thank you very much.
Thank you.